What's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Drumroll, please. Zach and EJ Talk Sports. Welcome to episode 24, the Pat Connaughton episode, our holiday episode. Why don't you drop me some Pat Connaughton facts, my friend, to kick us off?
Yeah, Pat Connaughton played baseball at Notre Dame as well as basketball and was drafted in the 4th round, the MLB draft.
Well, since I don't like Notre Dame, I now no longer like Pat Connaughton.
Okay.
We have a great show for you today. We're going to talk about fantasy football, our wrap-up thoughts as we move into the playoffs, touch on the NFL briefly, and then we are going to move on over to the last time I brought this man's name up. I think was the only time in our podcast history I received hate mail. So we're going to talk a little, and I will keep you on the edge of your seat to see who exactly that is. A little Major League free agency. We'll talk about that as well. Very excited to get into that as a Mets fan. Big day for us the other day, signing a Soto, but kicking it off, fantasy football. So this year, one of the most heated arguments you and I got in, or not an argument, debate, was the number one overall pick, Christian McCaffrey, how to handle the top of the NFL draft. And while I was a giant Breece Hall advocate, I am sitting outside the playoffs. So we saw what my logic got me. I'm going to call our debate a push in that topic. But
I will say I'm actually still going to stand by my statement in our debate because you said you take Taylor over McCaffrey.
Yes.
And I said, or is that because you think McCaffrey's going to get hurt? And you said, no, I think McCaffrey's going to play. If McCaffrey plays, I think I'd rather have Taylor. And I guess you could say it's a push because McCaffrey did not play and the injuries played a role. But I still believe that if he did play, he would have been the correct pick. Because as you saw,
he played a few games.
Yeah, and in that last game in Buffalo in the snow, he was starting to get it going before he popped his leg open again.
There we go.
Yeah.
And that's the risk you take. It's the risk you take. But since we're talking about that, why don't you tell me, what your thoughts were on this fantasy football season? And let's put injuries aside. So we'll leave injuries out, but why don't you tell me 3 players that you felt were an utter disappointment this year on their own standalone, so injury aside. And then 3 players that you feel, instead of came out of nowhere, because that's an easy one for us, let's say performed to their level of expectation or exceeded it.
Okay, for sure. So I think it was very interesting to see how the first few rounds, the first guys, like the first 24 guys, a good chunk of them really didn't live up to what was expected or what they had done in the past. There's been a lot of confusion, I think I'd say, for a lot of people of who to play because the scoring this year has been very inconsistent. The offenses haven't been as good. A lot of players are putting up duds. Speaking of duds, the 3 players I'm going to say, I'm just thinking of these on the spot. I mean, I'm going to start with Tyreek Hill. I'm not going to say McCaffrey because the injuries. Tyreek has not really been injured. It got off to a tough start to the season by getting pulled over and put in handcuffs on the road. But he really hasn't been getting it going without Tua. With Tua, he's had a few good games, but not to the level you'd expect from Tyreek Hill or a guy who was a top 3 pick. Similarly, he was kind of screwed over by Dak getting hurt because he was finally starting to get it going. But CeeDee Lamb really has not been overly impressive. He always has a slow start to the season, so that wasn't really a worry. But then as soon as he started going, Dak got hurt, so we'll never know. But really, since then, he's been getting a lot of volume, but he really hasn't been performing to the level of the guy who was the wide receiver 1 in fantasy last year, and you expected to be to that level again. And then the last guy, this is a tough one. Let's go A.J. Brown.
Okay.
I've never been an A.J. Brown guy. I think I've said that many times. He has 1 game of over 10 targets. That was week 1, I believe. And now he's getting into a public feud kind of with Jalen Hurts.
Right.
Brandon Graham came out and said the 2 actually aren't friends anymore. Just kind of, I thought, a weird thing to come out and say of players who are your teammates. But he really has not been producing to the wide receiver 1 level. And that is kind of what I expected of A.J. Brown. I never thought he would be a guy you could trust to give you week in and week out points.
So I'll jump in before we move to the opposite side of the coin. And I'll stay a little away from the first round, although I will say a blanket waiver statement of Dolphins wide receivers or any Jet offensive player. Because I think we came in, like you mentioned, Hill, Waddle. We thought we were going to have big seasons, and now we're realizing, that the NFL, again, a copycat league, says, hey, we're not going to let the Dolphins take the top off the defense. and let these guys get free,
Mm-hmm.
and we're going to make them have to move methodically down the field on us. And the Jets just are the Jets. I got burned by Brees, but if you were a Garrett Wilson guy, that production didn't live up to what the preseason fantasy hype was going to be. But I'll drop into, we'll say, the second round area, and I'm gonna label Tank Dell a bust
Mm-hmm.
this year.
Yeah.
That was a big one to
Ooh, I
me.
got one.
Yeah,
Travis Etienne.
Travis Etienne, another one. Exactly. Like you have Dell, you have Etienne. Um, I would also say, I mean, Josh Jacobs kind of turned it on later on,
No,
but
Josh Jacobs has been electric.
yeah, so he
Yeah,
kind of
he's
was a story of two
yeah,
halves
for
this year.
sure.
Um, T Higgins be another one.
I wouldn't say that. I think T. Higgins has picked it up in recent weeks when managers needed him. I mean, he's kind of been a monster, I'd say, in the last 5 weeks.
But he's given you on average anywhere between 7 and 9 points a game.
Yeah, well,
So
I think
it's
he missed a lot of games, which made it a little tricky. I think dealt with an injury a little. So, but yeah, I see T. Higgins.
mhm,
But there was definitely a lot of guys with name values who had solid chunks of the season where they're
yeah,
struggling. Like you could even look at DJ Moore.
yeah,
I was you, John, going into the season. He was really bad for the first maybe even 10 games. The last few games he's been picking it up,
yeah,
and they've really just been stopped trying to get him the ball deep
yep,
while they still have been able to do that on.
yep,
He ran an inside fade route, which
yeah.
was kind of a disgusting route for a touchdown, but they're also just getting the ball short and going. Debo Samuel.
Well, I'd go with, I think, a big one too, and keeping this curse alive. Apparently, would say Laporta.
Yeah,
Laporta
yeah.
had a non-existent year, so this whole like take the tight end early thing, I
Mm-hmm.
think we're starting to see Devontae Adams.
Mm-hmm.
Another one,
Dalton Kincaid. It's been
Dalton
awful.
Kincaid. Another one,
Yeah.
another big one. I'll rest on this would be Zamir White.
Oh
He
my,
had a
yeah.
lot of he had a lot of burn going into the preseason and everything else. Everybody thought he was going to be, a late round steal. Clearly didn't meet expectation. But now let's go to the other side. Who do you feel, where you drafted them, you either got the value or exceeded the
Mhm.
value?
So I'm actually there's a lot of people who say I'm just gonna start going by position. Look at the quarterback position. I mean, you got to say Josh Allen, Lamar, and Jalen Hurts. After those guys, you have Daniels and maybe Bo Nix, and those are really the quarterbacks
Hmm.
who are producing right now. So I think any of those guys you could say. Josh Allen had the monster game last
Yep.
week. He's just if you look at Josh Allen's statistics, he's had these down games
Hmm.
fantasy wise, but that is just because not because he's having a bad game, because his team genuinely didn't need him to do anything those
Yeah.
games. Those were they were just running the ball down the throat of the other team. He just got to chill for essentially the entire game. And when the games when he's playing,
Hmm.
I think he has been the best quarterback in fantasy football. I think he's been the best quarterback in football. I think he's the MVP, and I am almost at the point where I can say I think he may be better than Mahomes
Hmm.
because Josh Allen is fantastic. Obviously, those other quarterbacks I mentioned are also really great. Uh, Look at running back; it gets a little more tricky. I think Bijan Robinson has really delivered on the one of the few running backs who delivered first round value.
I think there's one clear
Uh,
guy in the
and
running
then
backs.
your Saquon and Derrick Henry. I think
Yeah,
you look at those three; they all delivered. Henry really exceeded his value there because
because he was falling.
he fell almost to the second round in a
Yeah.
lot of leagues. Ashan, once he came back from that injury, he's been getting all the checkdowns. He's
Hmm.
been essentially the entire offense besides
Yeah.
Jonnu Smith. And then one guy I'll shout out is Bucky Irving,
Hmm.
who kind of he didn't really turn it on like to a star level until the last 3 weeks, but he has been a solid producer all season. When Rashad White missed games, he's been really good. And then the last 2 weeks before this most recent week, he had two like 28-point fantasy games where he had like 150 on the ground.
Hmm.
Really looked like a star. He got hurt on the first drive this last week, but I think those are some of the guys who delivered, and Bucky especially kind of exceeded everything that was
Yeah.
expected of him.
I'll go with a couple just top ones. I think if you drafted Jamar Chase, you were
Oh
happy.
yeah, yeah.
He gave you a couple of. I think if I drafted Justin Jefferson, I'd be all right. I think he
Mm.
gave you a solid season. Not
He's
maybe
not
what you would
catching
expect it.
touchdowns though. That's
Nico Collins,
yeah.
another one. I mean, he missed he cost you a little time, but I think you take Nico, in that area, especially. I chose to go DK and Neighbors in the
Mm-hmm.
draft over Nico, and
Ooh,
where that
ooh.
looked good for me for the first 3 weeks of the season,
Mm-hmm.
that really burned you. So I think you where you took Nico, you're feeling good. I think you're happy with the selection of Pickens,
Mm-hmm.
especially once Russell Wilson took over quarterback.
Yeah, you could say Cortland Sutton, Jackson Smith, and Jigba. Those are
Exactly.
guys who really exceeded it.
Kenneth Walker.
Kenneth Walker. Zay Flowers has been really good if you just look at his point totals.
Yep.
Having Zay Flowers on your team is a complete headache, though.
Yeah.
Especially in a night game.
Mhm.
Zay Flowers in a night game, you can't start him because for some reason, whenever they have a primetime game, they just totally forget he's on the field and he's doing 18 miles of cardio in motion every game. One guy we forgot to say for the guys who have disappointed, and I'm actually putting not that much blame on him, Marvin Harrison. I think Marvin Harrison is not only, I do not think he's as good of a player maybe as advertised, but I think he is still an amazing receiver.
Yeah.
He's made amazing plays. I do not think that Gannon and the offense, but especially Murray, have looked Harrison's way enough. For the first half of the season, they were only sending him on go routes, which, while he can run a really nice go route, that's not the only thing that is to him. He can run a complete route tree. They started getting him involved more with more in-breaking routes and a more complex route tree, but they really don't look his way as much as they do. Obviously, Trey McBride and even Michael Wilson gets just as many looks as Marvin Harrison, which does not make sense to me when you just spent the 4th overall pick on him.
Right.
So he's obviously disappointed. And then tight end-wise, you obviously have Laporta, Kincaid, Evan Ingram's been a disappointment.
McBride's been a disappointment. I've had him all year.
McBride, I don't know about McBride. I think you look at the really good tight ends, you're looking at Bowers, Kittle, and McBride. I think McBride's been... Let's take a look at
target share, but he's not.
I think he's a lot better in PPR than he would be in a standard league because he gets a lot of receptions, maybe not as many touchdowns. And then tight ends who have disappointed, we've said a few of them. I think actually you will say tight ends who have lived up to the expectations. Travis Kelce's been but he's lived up to my expectation because my expectations for him are pretty low. But I think he's exceeded those because he had a really good stretch where he looked like the future Hall of Fame tight end that he is. So it must be a weird podcast. I'm saying something good about Travis Kelce. I think it might be time for me to stop talking about these tight ends here.
Well, the interesting thing about fantasy is I firmly believe that I'm cursed. That I am dealing with my version of the curse of the Bambino when it comes to fantasy. I have never in our league, which is well over a decade now, have never won the championship and have not even been to the finals in all of my time. So this year we decided our producer and I decided to try a little fantasy experiment. Our producer, who did zero research prior to the draft, zero strategy, went in stone cold. And the entire season, I have vowed to not offer our producer, any assistance with managing her team.
Wow.
And I went into the draft, prepped, researched, studying my opponents, studying the drafts, studying teams' offense. I went in fully prepared, and we were going to see through the course of the year who ended up having the better season. And I had a horrendous season where my players couldn't find the end zone with a map, and our producer is in the playoffs. And I think sitting with the 5th seed. Is it the 5th seed? 6th seed. 6th seed. Fell. Lost a couple tough ones down the stretch. So my question to you, fantasy football. Give me the percentage in order to be good. Luck, skill. Where are we at with fantasy?
Before I give you that percentage, I think I'm going to give you one of my favorite quotes, which may help you next season in fantasy football. I think the quote goes, "He who says he can and he who says he can't are both usually right." If you're saying I'm cursed, I'm going to lose, you're probably going to lose.
It is true.
So I think you got to start believing. Next year could be your year, maybe. To the luck or skill thing.
Tell it to Charlie Brown every time Lucy's holding that football.
I'm going to go 60%, 65% luck, 35% skill. So I think there's definitely some skill involved in drafting the team and drafting players and knowing who to pick up, who to start. But also at the same time, there's some luck. You don't know who's going to get hurt. You don't know which of the rookie quarterbacks are going to like which receivers. You don't know new offensive coordinators. There's also, like, what if your player catches 6 touchdowns, they get called back?
Yeah.
Is that your fault? He caught the touchdown.
Right.
So I think there's a lot of luck. Even, like, I started Juwan Jennings in the playoff in our league the other night, yesterday, when we filmed this, and I felt really confident about it. And I don't know, is it a skill issue that he had a terrible game?
Right.
I mean, I don't know. I just feel like there's some weeks where you're riding high, and I think a lot of that is the luck, where you're having a really good week. And I think there's some weeks where you're just you're having a tough week. I think there's a lot more skill before the season starts with drafting the team, or with making trades. I think that is
Yeah.
part of the skill. But the luck is really, I think, most week to week matchups is a lot of luck.
Yeah. The other thing that I'll add in is I think league settings and your league mates, the kind of league you're in, I think play a big role as well. So when you're in a league where you can only do 2 transactions a week
Mm-hmm.
and you have a big roster, it's a deep league, 12 plus teams, that can significantly, and you have only 2 IR spots available. That can level the playing field significantly,
Mm-hmm.
especially if you have a team that gets injured, or has some injury issues. That's for this year. What hurt me early on was I just had a whole host of
Mm-hmm.
injuries. Only had 2 IR spots. Had a bench of players that I drafted that I really liked, like guys like Rico Dowdle.
Mm-hmm.
I had Swift on my bench,
Mm-hmm.
and eventually I had to start dropping players to
Mm-hmm.
be able to pick up people for to play because we only had 2 IR spots, and I had more injured players, and I even had IR spots, and even with that, we still only had 2 transactions.
For sure.
So you're getting to a point where early in the season, if you can hold your cards long, especially if you go in on all in on your draft and you pick players you believe in and know that you got players that are going to take time to develop. Like I might be picking people in the draft that aren't going to be serviceable guys to week 7 or 8,
Mm-hmm.
and now you can't really hold on to them because of injuries or everything else. You're kind of already early on by the unfortunate injury bug having to rework your whole team. And that
Mm-hmm.
does have, I think, dramatic impact. And then also for players who don't know how to manage their team or, you know, um, have, some only manageable injuries, capping things, it takes away the advantage of somebody
Mm-hmm.
who might be able to go deep in a league and know there's players out here. If I had two more pickups, if I could pick up 3 players a week, or if I could pick
Mm-hmm.
up 4 players a week or shuffle things around, there's other players I can grab and hold before somebody else can get their hands on them or wait for
Mm-hmm.
them to have that big like pickup of the week
Mm-hmm.
kind of moment. We sometimes, I'm sure you could probably tell me a handful of players that you probably identified within the first couple weeks that might have been like good early stashes at that point in
Mm-hmm.
time. But if you don't have the ability at that time because you're
Mm-hmm.
grabbing guys because of injury or buy or whatever it is, it's kicker defense streams. It's really limited what you can do, and I do think that that does impact
Mm-hmm.
your ability to manage a fantasy team in the long
I
run.
think what you have to do in regards to when you have this limited roster, you got to trust your guys.
Right.
So, like, I'll give two specific examples of this year. We'll start with the guy who I picked to be my RB1, Rashad White.
Hmm.
Rashad White was not very good to start the year. It seemed like Bucky had a 50-50 split. Neither of them were really scoring. Rashad White, I was like, I can't trust Rashad White. I was almost at the point where I was going to drop Rashad White, but then I was looking at the people I was going to pick up, and I was like, there's no chance I ever really play these guys.
Hmm.
And there's a slim chance that Rashad White could bounce back and be the player I drafted him to be. Part of it has been Bucky banged up last week. He had a great game last week. But also, even when Bucky's been playing great, he's been playing great.
Hmm.
He has carved out a role in his offense, and because you hang on to the guy you drafted, despite another guy, Chase Brown, I didn't have those signs. I drafted him later. But I knew I really liked Chase Brown.
Hmm.
And Chase Brown really wasn't doing very much for the first few weeks. Zach Moss was getting carries,
Hmm.
and I didn't see it. I was like, why wouldn't they give the ball to Chase Brown? Because I saw that when they gave the ball to Chase Brown made dynamic plays with the ball in his hands. And in recent weeks, Chase Brown, and like I'll even say the last like 5-6 weeks, has been one of the best running backs in football. So I think it's important to hang on to your guys. And I think the having more transactions doesn't necessarily give you the ability to improve your team. It also could give you the ability to make your team worse if you keep dropping these guys who could end up being good. Like another league I have 12 people. There's one guy who has made well over 100 transactions on the season,
Hmm.
and he got last place. So I don't think it's necessarily like the more skillful players with more transactions are going to be able to maximize their team. I think it might be that they have more transactions, but they don't use that many
Hmm.
transactions just to salvage the guys on their team who they know could be studs.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think when we look at injuries and, productivity and, kind of where you stand in the pack and as we go week and week in the season, the amount of time to make the playoffs gets slimmer and slimmer, being able to manage your roster is critical. And, for owners who have the luxury of saying, I can make moves based off need, and, oh, I want to, strengthen my running back position. So I'm going to drop this guy who hasn't done much and pick somebody else up, is different than I got to find a wide receiver to plug in because I got two wide receivers out with concussion. And then, oh, my kicker's on bye this week. So now I got to grab that. There's my two transactions.
Hmm.
And there's other players that I maybe would want to have grabbed or made some other roster moves that now I have to put off another week or another week. And then, oh, here comes this week's injuries and whatever. And certain, I think the guys that end up making it deep in fantasy, you do have, a lot of players that probably most likely stayed healthy or
Hmm.
just had consistent years, weren't very feast or famine where one week they're dropping 20, then the next, 2 weeks they're giving you three, and then they're giving you another 15.1, then they're dropping another couple weeks with fours.
Hmm.
So it's there's a couple things that factor in, but like you said, part of running a team and being a good GM coach is trusting your guys. So let's kind of move over now to the NFL, and why don't you tell me, as we're getting ready in the NFL as well to head into the playoffs, um, which teams right now in the NFC you trust to kind of stay on target and perform according to their
Hmm.
standards in the playoffs, and which teams in the NFC. So and then maybe as a bonus, which teams right now you're not buying the hype on
Hmm.
that you think are paper thin.
So I think the teams, let's go in the NFC, that you could 100% trust, they are what they appear to be, and I think they are Super Bowl contenders.
Hmm.
You have the Lions. The Lions have lost pretty much everyone you could name on the defensive end, and they are still winning.
Hmm.
And I think their offense is amazing. Their defense, even after losing all these people, they still have a strong defense. Aiden Hutchinson goes down. McNeil, the D tackle, steps up. Now he is a monster on the inside, getting the pass rush. So I think they're obviously amazingly coached by Dan Campbell. Johnson is a magician. They have all the personnel. I think they, to me, are the favorites to win the Super Bowl. And then you also got to look in who has persuaded me in the last week. You look at the NFC North. Uh, I think the Vikings were at the point where you have to say maybe the Vikings are just a really good team. I mean, obviously the weapons are there with Jones, Jefferson, Addison,
Hmm.
Hockenson. Those are some weapons. Darnold has been really good. The defense is the highlight of that team. Flores has got that defense playing inspired football. I think them and the Lions are the teams that are really wowing me in the NFC. And I'll also give a shout out to the Eagles, who are
Hmm.
obviously winning a lot. In the NFC, the team that is not impressing me, that I think could actually, they could win the Super Bowl, but I think they might have a short playoff run, is the Packers.
Yeah.
Because not only because they're the third best team in their division, I do not think Love has been particularly great this year. He's been throwing a lot of turnovers, and that's obviously not a fine line where, oh, you're throwing turnovers, you can't win a Super Bowl, you can win football games. But it's just, I think he's a little too risky with the football. I don't think he's been as great as he was last year.
Hmm.
I don't think the offense is as great as it was last year, though Jacobs has been amazing.
Hmm.
Uh, just speaking more on the offense, I don't like how they're coordinated, mostly because I have Jaden Reed on my fantasy team, and they have, and the Ravens do this with Zay Flowers too. They use them as a glorified decoy, which is essentially there's some games where they're getting the ball, and the rest of the games they're just going to be in motion every single play. They're going to run this way, run back this way, and they have no intentions of getting the ball.
Hmm.
And I feel like when you're using your best players like that, almost like the Chiefs did with Travis Kelsey during the entire regular season last year, where he was almost had no intention of actually getting the
Hmm.
ball. I think it kind of minimizes your offense. So would they maybe try to unlock these guys for the playoffs? I feel like it might be a little late, so I'm not buying into the Packers, and then we can go right to the AFC. I'm not buying it on the Ravens.
Okay.
Uh, yeah.
I think so. For the NFC, I don't have any issue or see anything outside of perhaps the Lions and the Eagles being on a collision course. I remember when I played baseball, growing up, the thing that we were always told is speed never slumps.
Hmm.
Like speed never
Hmm.
goes into a slump. So as long as you keep hustling, you're out there, you're working the bases. No matter what, that part of your game will never slump. I think in the NFL, while it's probably not, it's such an easy phrase to transfer over. I think when you have a running game,
Hmm.
that is tougher to slump. And the
Hmm.
Lions and the Eagles have a running game that can show up anywhere. And when I think you have that, I think it makes you very, very tough to beat in any
Hmm.
in any environment. Um, the team that I have probably no faith in would be Seattle.
Mm.
Seattle doesn't scare me in the slightest.
Mm-hmm.
Tampa, if they win the South, they're a feisty team. But we've seen what the Bake Show does in critical moments. Unfortunately, I'm going to need to see him. It was last year when it came down to the end and he got picked off on that slant pass. In a critical time. So I'm going to need to see Bake, do something before I buy into
Mm-hmm.
them. But I'd put the team that doesn't scare me at all as the Seattle Seahawks, which is a bummer because I'm a big Seattle
Mm-hmm.
fan. I like the city,
I
I like everything
think,
else.
yeah, the Seahawks are a good team,
Hmm.
but I think the main thing that might be holding them back is that when I've watched the Seahawks this year, one thing has stuck out to me is that Geno Smith is awful at
Yes,
football.
Gino
He
makes a
is
lot of big
he
mistakes.
is a, he is just an awful quarterback, and for a lot of the year he was leading the league in passing. And I was like, this is like when Sam Howell
Right.
was leading the league in passing last year. Geno Smith has been horrendous this year. Speaking of Sam Howell, he's their backup. There's
Exactly.
been many times when I was like, why isn't Sam Howell in this game? I really like Gino as a dude. Gino's
Yeah.
a great story. I think he's a pretty solid person, and I wish him the best. But he is really not playing to the level where I don't think he could lead a team to a playoff win at all this year.
AFC for me, somebody's going to have to beat the Chiefs before I knock the
Mm-hmm.
Chiefs, out of that top spot. I like the Chiefs. The Bills. The problem with me with the Bills right now, I agree with everything you said, is we've been in the regular season. We've seen the Bills do this in the regular season, and then we see what happens in the
Mm-hmm.
playoffs. So with the Bills, I feel like just like we are talking about the Eagles and the Lions, you hate picking chalk and you love, coming up with a sexy pick, but it's really hard to not envision the Chiefs and the Bills on a collision course with each
Mm-hmm.
other. The Texans, they have to get their act
Oh,
together
for
right
sure.
now. They haven't really shown that they're a team that still has that stock going up. The Ravens, I love the fact they have a ground game now, and they can play a team differently.
Mm-hmm.
But again, like right now, one drive to win it all on your 20, Lamar, your quarterback. How confident are you?
I'm pretty confident, but the reason I have been against the Ravens the whole season, and I still am now, even though he's getting close to doing it, is I saw Lamar Jackson lose all the weight this season, right? Going
Hmm.
into the season. He's been running a lot more. And I said, and then I watched the hits
Yeah.
he's been constantly taking. I said, he will not be throwing a football in the playoffs
Hmm.
because he will be on the sideline injured. I
Yeah.
still think that may happen before the playoffs. And my thing is, and this is going to be ridiculous, saying about a guy, Lamar Jackson, who has some 30 something touchdowns and like 4 interceptions.
Hmm.
If they shut down the run game, which has happened in certain games, if Derrick Henry is not running the ball effectively, and funnily enough, in those games where he has not been running the ball effectively, at the beginning of the fourth quarter usually breaks like an 80-yard touchdown
Hmm.
run. So the stats don't really happen. But in the games where they're not running the ball effectively, I do not believe in the offense's ability to pass the football as much as I do in other teams. I think the Bills, I think Josh Allen is on a different level than everyone else in the NFL this year.
Hmm.
I think he's cut down on the turnovers. He's been precise with the football. I think the weapons added by subtraction by losing Diggs. And if I have to throw out one team besides the Bills and Chiefs, who I think could make a run in the playoffs, I'm going to go with the Denver Broncos. I mean,
Defense doesn't slump.
do they have weapons? Their receivers, besides Cortland Sutton,
They're built right.
are
They're being
mediocre.
built right.
Their running backs are mediocre.
Yeah.
But Cortland Sutton is an animal. Bo Nix plays amazing football for what Sean Payton is trying to do right now. Sean
Right.
Payton has almost revived his career and restored the faith
Yeah.
that many lost in him. And their defense is amazing.
I like the Chargers too. I think the Chargers would be an interesting
I
team in the
do I
playoffs.
do like the Chargers. I
Herbert,
think
he unlocks if if he
he's
starts.
been really good.
And yeah, so
Yeah.
I think those two teams, I agree with you on that. So let me ask you a question because I was thinking about this the other day. Do Would you say American sports fans, do we root for the underdog or do we like a champion? And when in our eyes do the champions tend to become the evil empire,
Mhm.
the team we root against? Where do you think we fall on this?
I think we definitely go for the underdog. So, just even like myself, when I'm watching a game that I really have no standing in, two college football teams I don't care about, do I root for? Probably the team that's worse. Just because I want to see the person who's not projected to win win. And I think it's very rare to see someone who won a championship in a certain sport have general people around the country rooting for them the next year.
Mm-hmm.
I think after 2 championships, it becomes the evil empire. So I think like the Chiefs, the Patriots, what the Warriors were, but maybe it's situational because I think you could say the Celtics are that because the Celtics have only won one,
Mm-hmm.
but everyone hates the Celtics. The Celtics might have been the evil empire before they even won that championship. The way people talk about them, but I think once you've won 2 championships, or you're in one of these big market teams like Boston or even New York, where you win one and people are going to start rooting against you no matter what, rooting against all your players.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's actually a very fun thing to have as if you're a fan of that team, because then you know that your team's really made it and is that much better than the other teams.
But now, question with this, and you can chime in as a Pats fan.
Mm-hmm.
Did the Pats go as long as they went before they were really becoming the despised team? Because if I'm being honest with you,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like where memory serves for me, I didn't feel like everybody was turning on the Pats
Mm-hmm.
until their Randy Moss free agent
Mm-hmm.
perfect season.
Yeah.
That's when it felt like. But right now, the Chiefs still have a lot of mojo, and they're still this lovable team. Do
Really.
you feel? I feel like. Do you feel that and if you have a different opinion, jump in. But part of my theory is it not actually about winning an underdog, but is it about money and resources? So we hate big market teams because, say, if the majority of us vocal sports fans are um, people that are living in this general area of having people with much more income above them and people that might have less underneath, that when we see these, oh, they have all the money in the world, all the resources in the world, we instinctively
Mm-hmm.
look at that as that is not something I'm going to root for, but rather finding something that more kind of embodies this blue collar. And where
Mm-hmm.
you have the Chiefs, for example, they don't, even though they're winning, they traded away their big star Tyreek Hill
Mm-hmm.
and kept going. They didn't bring in a bunch of the next. They're not the Yankees of football, or they weren't functioning like the Dallas Cowboys of, oh, we'll just go out and get the next high-priced free agent, or we'll just bring in a
Mm-hmm.
whole host of big guys. But rather, it's a small market. Kansas City is a small market.
Mm-hmm.
You got scrappy guys, homegrown, and doing a thing. So what are your thoughts on maybe some of the factors that perhaps impact the way that we look at franchises
Mm-hmm.
and root for them? Did we not start rooting or turning on Golden State until they started to function like a big market team, where they started
Mm-hmm.
pulling in bigger and bigger free agents, and then it
Mm-hmm.
starts to become almost an embarrassment of riches
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to just straight winning?
I think it's both. So fans root against the big markets and they root against champions,
Hmm.
and when they come together, it's really bad. So Golden
Like the
State
perfect
had
storm.
won one championship and they were a fun team. They lost, blew a 3-1 lead. They brought in Kevin Durant. That's the big market part, bringing in the money.
Hmm.
Then they won 2 more championships, and then it was like, oh. So I don't know if you could say, was it bringing in Kevin Durant or was it the fact that they won when they
Right.
brought in Kevin Durant? And I think people despise the Dallas Cowboys. They don't like the Yankees, Boston teams, all these big markets. But I also think, like you're talking about the Chiefs, across the country, if you asked all of the people across the country, a majority of people cannot stand the Chiefs. And myself included, but I'm going to try to remove personal bias here. I think a lot of people, even though they're not a huge fan of Mahomes, they're definitely not a huge fan of Kelsey. Uh, they may not be a fan of Taylor Swift,
Hmm.
and I don't think the State Farm ads they're doing are really doing them any favors with the bundle Rooski. But yeah, I think it is the championships and the riches, but I think I'm going to say more emphasis on the championships because while people had an issue with when the Dodgers deferred a majority of Shohei Ohtani's contract, people talked about it for about 5 days.
Hmm.
Then I didn't hear anything about it until it came back and they won the World Series. And I was like, how are they supposed to do this? They're not even paying their best players.
Right.
I think it's the winning. When the winning is more important than spending the money, because there's teams that spend money that don't win. No one really is like
Hmm.
rooting against them. They're almost like maybe they're due for one.
Right. What about this? So two other questions, because one of the first times I really saw the active, immediate rooting against. Actually, I can think of two of them. Active, like immediately, like rooting against teams was when the Heat put together one of the first super
Mhm.
teams with Bosh, LeBron, and Wade. They didn't even touch a basketball, and you felt like it was immediately polarizing. And when the Eagles that year with Vince Young and everything tried to
Mhm.
tried to build that super team and completely collapsed. So where do you think fandom stands on super teams? Do you see that as something different than big market, big money? Do we see that as just something that off the rip we're just like, you know what, we want to root against that? And
Mhm.
then the other question I have to you, same thing, is does our opinion on players change? So say for example, everybody might feel we were against the Dodgers. But if Shohei was chasing down the Barry Bonds single season home run records,
Mhm.
do you feel that we get behind players when they're chasing history, regardless of the player, if they play the
Yeah.
game right? So if there's no,
Mhm.
if chasing of a particular record is not marred with some sort of potential scandal or something,
Mhm.
where do you think we
So
stand on super teams and chasing of records?
So I think the issue many have with super teams is that not even as personal fans of their teams, as general fans of the league, they want fairness, they want competition across the league. They don't want it to be one team beating down on other teams night in and night out. They want competitive. Let's say the NBA, they want competitive basketball,
Hmm.
and I think that's a fair point. But then here's the thing: it's not even when a team becomes so good where you could call them almost a super team, and they're beating out other teams a reason that which is not I do not agree with it that many fans might say they don't like even having a super team on their team. So you win, then it gets discredited. There's
Hmm.
an excuse. Like when the Celtics won this year, it's oh they have a super team. Oh
Right.
everyone got hurt. It's not oh they dog walked the entire league
Hmm.
for the entire year. So I think even fans of teams with the super teams, in general, what is wanted through sports is competition and close games and big moments, and that could be diminished by super teams.
Hmm.
And then yeah, I feel like if there was a player who had my least favorite player in the NBA, let's say it's Joel Embiid. I don't like Joel Embiid. If he had 85 points going into the fourth quarter and he could get 100, I'd turn on the game and I'd be rooting for him to get it 100. So I think yes, when someone is chasing a record which has stood for a long time and could be in the history books, people kind of get behind them, kind of like how even me, I wasn't rooting against Judge getting the home run record when he did 2 years ago because I thought it was cool to see someone who I watched with my own eyes
Right.
break this record.
And that's a phenomenal point, because that's what I think too. I think when we see somebody break a record in our time, it connects us
Hmm.
to sports history. I saw this player play,
Hmm.
and we feel like that makes this generation of what we're watching a part of universal greatness
Hmm.
in the lore of that particular sport. So talking about greatness and lore of sports, I will bring up the most controversial name on this show. That is Bill Belichick,
Hmm.
who I said was an overrated coach. In from an NFL standpoint, probably one of our other most heated debates,
Hmm. Yeah.
and definitely the comment column in our channel definitely didn't favor my opinion. However, he has now landed with a new team, and he is going to be
Hmm.
coaching in college, and he's
Hmm.
going to be coaching the Tar Heels.
Hmm.
You are a UNC guy,
I am,
so
yeah.
you get your head coach from your
Hmm.
favorite sports franchise down to now coaching your favorite college team. Why don't you kick me off with your thoughts on Belichick? Good for
Hmm.
college, good for football, and where do you see this going?
So I think it's good at football for football to have Bill Belichick back in the game. Personally, I think he could have retired, but there's some. I'll look at the pros and cons or my concerns and what I'm not concerned about with him coming to UNC. My concerns is number one, college football is evolving. It is extremely different from the NFL at this point with the transfer portal, which is actually kind of almost one could say it's making it more similar to the NFL, but one could be saying it's going in the complete opposite direction
Hmm.
because it's not the same thing as what traditional college sports were. So the transfer portal, NIL, all of that. I don't know how equipped Bill Belichick is for the changing landscape of college sports. Other concerns: they just got rid of Mac Brown.
Hmm.
One of the main reasons they got rid of him is they wanted a younger person to come in and kind of re-energize the locker room and the
Right.
program. Bill Belichick is only 1 year younger than Mac Brown. So that's not really doing that. And my final concern is that there was a rumor there may be a clause in the contract that Bill's successor be his son
Son,
Steve.
yeah.
I do not want Steve Belichick to be the coach of the UNC Tar Heels. But what I do know is that Bill Belichick is a great football coach. and maybe he lost a step in the NFL in his last few years.
Mm-hmm.
But he can lose a step, and he could still come into college and dominate.
Yeah.
I'm very confident that UNC is going to be playing to the best of their ability with the personnel they have on the field next year. I also think that if Belichick can understand the transfer portal and stuff like that, he could assemble, almost like Deion Sanders is doing, but on a completely different level, a really good team with recruits and transfers, because who would not want to play for Bill Belichick?
Right.
A fast receiver. But so I feel like overall I'm satisfied with Bill Belichick being the head coach, but I do not know if it's really a super long-term answer. Because there's also the concern that if he really coaches a great job, would he go back to the NFL? He said, "I'm here to stay." What do you want him to say? "I'm here to get back to the NFL." Like, he wouldn't. So I think there's a very solid chance that if he still wants to go back to the NFL after maybe 2 or 3 years, and someone offers him a job, I think he would go.
Okay. I'm going to be more firm with my opinions on this one. So essentially putting myself on the record, and brace yourself. But I think that Bill Belichick is going to be wildly successful at the University of North Carolina. If I was starting a college program today, or if I was brought in to revamp a college football program, the thing I think you need from your head coach is he's got to have star power, because we're dealing with a whole new crop of athletes now. And now, if you're telling these athletes that they can make money in college, you definitely need somebody that is basically going to draw attention and name value to that program. So if I am a college recruit right now, and I know that everybody's going to be swarming to watch Carolina games, that is a team to be on. The other thing is, I think Bill Belichick is at his heart a coach, a football coach. I think he likes coaching players, developing players. And I think where he lost his touch in the NFL is you're now dealing with grown men who don't want to be treated that way, who don't want to have hotel curfews, don't want to be told you can't speak your mind to the media, don't want to be told you can't be flashy, you can't be yourself. And I have, while I'm not in those locker rooms, that is a suspicion of mine, and basically, things that we would hear about his ability to relate. But I think for college, his greatest selling point is I know how to develop NFL talent.
Yeah.
So come here, we will teach you how to play the right way. We are obviously tied into the NFL in a myriad of ways, so you will get a great look. And from a scouting perspective, playing for this program. You mentioned Deion Sanders. I feel that they're similar, and yet at the opposite ends of the spectrum in that way, where Deion is the flashy, strike up my theme song. Let's go out there and, hey, I'm just going to clear everybody out. And Belichick is definitely still more of a quiet, but focus on the fundamentals kind of coach. But I think that they hit that number one thing that you want out of your college coach, which is attention, national attention, which now brings, your opens up your ability to recruit across the country. And I think that he does have a strong pitch. I think he's obviously going to fall along the lines of like where a Saban, a Brian Kelly does, those kind of guys. We're here, we're trying to develop talent, we're trying to develop young men, we're going to run a tight ship. And we'll see where I agree with your point, where it could possibly run thin is if over time this NIL thing continues to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and these players they want a bigger bite of that apple, and somehow they're feeling more clamped down in a UNC program under a coach Belichick, as opposed to maybe being able to be more flashy if Dion doesn't jump to the NFL and stays there. And I don't think, if I'm being honest, I don't see him returning to the NFL.
Yeah.
That's be my bet. I think the college game right now is where he lands in terms of the amount of respect incoming players will have for him, where I'm not positive he still has that. I think the NFL's getting younger, and we're seeing guys like Matt Rule burn out of the NFL and just not be able to hack it, but then go off and rebuild these college programs. So I think that this whole sense of, maybe the one thing that isn't talked about too much is the mentality of the coach in the NFL. When you see these, Dolphin, Mike McDaniel's kind of guys. McDaniel was these young, energetic, hey, I'm a player's coach. You guys don't want, we're going to cut 2 days off our whatever. Hey, we're going to play loud rock music at our practices. NFL guys might think, hey, I'm at this point now, I don't need a disciplinarian or whatever. I'm here to do a job. Treat me like a guy doing a job. College, you still have the ability to develop players and tell them, hey, you're not there yet. You try to tell that to, try and go tell OBJ, hey, we need to tighten up your route running.
Yeah, he just got released.
Exactly.
One thing that does scare me with Belichick, though, is the one major knock on him at the end of his career in the NFL is that he was not a good GM.
Right. Horrible.
He was a really bad GM, especially at the end. And I'm interested to see how he handles some of those GM responsibilities at UNC with bringing in the prospects and stuff like that. It worries me a little that he may go after the wrong 5 stars or whatever, but I feel like I agree with you. I think he's going to be extremely successful for however many years he is at UNC.
Yeah, because look, he's not a dunce. He's a man that wants to be a winner.
Mm-hmm.
So do we really sit there and think that in his retirement he was just that bored that he started a social media account? No, I mean he has people that are telling him, hey, look, if you want to, appeal to a wider audience, lean into your I wear sleeves and I'm frumpy and this and that and this and I don't know much and I'm an old guy that's like out of touch or whatever it might be. And, doing things that he did, appearing on the Manning cast and stuff, like in the McAfee show, and just being more relatable and more vocal. That's him, I think, studying what he can improve upon, what maybe cost him stuff. So I think that he takes that mindset into everything. It's going to be great. And, I think we'll wrap up today with talking about people on the move, like Belichick. Let's turn our eye to baseball really quick, and let's talk about some of your thoughts on some of the players that we've seen move around over these past couple weeks. It's been exciting.
Yeah. The 4 big moves I'm going to look at here are the Red Sox bringing Crochet, the Yankees who just traded for Devin Williams, the Cubs getting Kyle Tucker, and mostly the Mets getting Juan Soto. So, as a Sox fan, I'm very happy we got Crochet. He could be a top-of-the-line arm. There are some concerns that he's only been a starter for 1 year, and we did give up some really good prospects to get him. Braden Montgomery, I don't mind losing him. While I'm sure he will be a really good player, he could be a 30, 40 home run guy. We just didn't really need an outfielder there.
Mm-hmm.
However, losing Kyle Teal is a tough one for me because I thought he was a great player. I thought he was going to be the catcher of the Boston Red Sox for a really long time. So I don't love that, but I think the risk reward of getting a guy like Crochet is good. So I'm very glad we made that move. The Yankees getting Devin Williams, I hate because I do not like the Yankees because Devin Williams is amazing. And I think that's actually a main thing that hurt them last year was Clay Holmes, who was the closer for a significant chunk of the year and cost them a lot of games. And their relief pitching was not overly strong. I think this should help them. They may still need an offensive boost, though, after losing Soto. I guess the Cubs are going for it. Kyle Tucker is probably the most underrated and one of the best players in baseball. He is a great player. So he in Chicago should be interesting. I don't know if they're really going to be a team that's really pushing to win next year, but you never know.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, Juan Soto. I think it's a good move for the Mets. I think it's a good move for Soto. I think it's hilarious how Yankees fans cannot accept rejection, that a player could possibly not want to play in New York. Well, he wants to play in New York, not possibly want to be a Yankee, which I fully understand why he would not want to be a Yankee. I think the reaction is kind of proving why he would not want to be a Yankee. And while it's obviously a massive contract, I also didn't mention Max Fried going to the Yankees, which is another good move. Max Fried is a really good player. Another big contract. Does Juan Soto deserve this much money? Does Max Fried deserve that much money?
Right.
The answer is no. I don't think any of the players being paid the contracts that are being paid right now are worth that much money.
Totally
But
agree.
Teams don't have a choice. It's not the issue that they're overpaying. It's the issue that the market's overinflated.
Right.
There's nothing you can do. Is Juan Soto worth this much money? No. But do you want to have Juan Soto on your team? Yes. Well, this is how much you have to pay.
Exactly right.
So there's really, like, if you want to sign these big-time players, if you want to build a contending team, at least temporarily, you got to put logic to the wind, bring your wallet out and start paying, because it is ridiculous how much money these people are being paid. And the amount of years is hilarious. Juan Soto's going to be 41 when this contract's up.
Yeah.
And, like, A-Rod had a contract till he was 40. How'd that work out for the Yankees?
Yep.
All these players who were, some even getting paid still, who retired 6 years ago. And I think it's very, another thing where, like, do you want to have Juan Soto on your team for that long? Probably not.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm sure someone would take a 41-year-old Juan Soto, not for $70 million
Right.
a year.
You'll have to pay a DH at that point in
But
time.
that's how many years you have to do.
Yep.
Because they go in and now with all these agents, they're saying, if you don't give me 15,760, I'm not signing. So then it's like, well, what are you supposed to do? Because it's not like you could say, oh, it would have to take all of the owners collectively agreeing, we're not paying you this much for it to work. And even still, I think one guy would say, I am paying you that much, come play for me. Because you can't just like say, I'm not going to go up to the market because then you're just going to lose.
Right.
That's what the Athletics are doing. Moneyball isn't working anymore because of how large this market is getting, because they can't get anyone who have any significant value with the money they're willing to spend. And now they've kind of caved in and signed a big name in Luis Severino. So I think their franchise is going to be saved now.
One of us Mets fans. Yeah. So, every team that gains a player through free agency, there's a team that loses a player.
Mm-hmm.
Who right now would you say are two of your biggest losers in free agency?
So if the Yankees had not brought in the pitchers, I'd say the Yankees, but bringing those pitchers is a big move, so I'm not going to say them. I'm going to say the Astros, because this isn't free agency, but losing Kyle Tucker.
Mm-hmm.
Kyle Tucker is such a good baseball player. Losing him, it kind of tells me I don't know if they're looking to win right now. They might be in rebuild mode. I think their team is taking a significant hit. And then I'll get crafty with it. I'm going to say, this isn't that crafty. I'm going to say the Dodgers. The Dodgers brought in Blake Snell, which was a really good move. I really like Blake Snell. But they've been in on every single one of these guys. Adames, Fried, Soto. And they only got one of them?
Yeah.
Because they're bringing a checkbook as big as anyone besides Steve Cohen. And they're missing out on a lot of these guys. So did they get worse during free agency? No. They actually added Blake Snell.
Mm-hmm.
But they were trying to get a lot more than they ended up getting.
Agreed. And, the only thing I'll comment on with the Mets is I love the Soto signing, but unless we're starting him on the mound opening day, it's not really going to work out too well for us if we don't revamp that pitching staff.
Mm-hmm.
But super excited for the Major League Baseball season. Very excited. I'll be rooting for you in our fantasy league.
Yeah.
You're now my team of choice de facto wise. This has been episode 24, man. Our Pat Connaughton episode.
Pat Connaughton.
For all you out there, feel free in the comments below to drop us a note letting us know what you think. Do you root for the underdog? Do you root for the favorite? Any fantasy busts or very surprised players who have helped you win your regular season and stream towards the playoffs? And if there's anybody else out there free agent wise for baseball that you'd like to see sign with a particular team, drop us some notes. Let us know. All right, my friend. Awesome job today. Everybody else, till next time. Take care.